Okay, what's up guys? Welcome to this week's Q&A. As always, thank you for your questions. Leave any new questions you have on the bottom of this post and like all the questions you want answered. So sorry if there's loud background noise right now. I'm rendering a video, the video of me taking the JCat. So I'll try to take out as much as that background noise as I can in Audacity with the noise removal, but there might still be some there, so sorry about that. My computer's noisy when it's busy. But yeah, let's get started. So Musa asks, throughout your AJAT journey, to what extent did you uphold the all Japanese all the time philosophy? And then in parentheses, before you actively made YouTube content / preached to any followers. Have you literally not interacted with English or English speakers when you had no obligation to do so? Or did you, say, watch a thing or two on YouTube when you didn't feel in the Japanese groove? So I'm just going to preface this by saying this isn't my recommendation of what you should do. This is just me reporting on what I did and how I thought at the time. So when I first started AJAT, I was still going to high school in America. So there was English in my life, of course. When I was going to school, class was in English and stuff. But whenever I was in class, I secretly had headphones in and I was listening to Japanese. And then when it was lunch, I would go to the library and eat my lunch by myself while watching anime on my iPod Touch. And after school, I would go home and just do Japanese all day. So I really did try to stick with the all Japanese all the time philosophy. I mean, I read the AJAT website and I mean, I had no conception of what was important and what wasn't. All I knew was that Katsumoto said that he did this and he got this result and I want the same result. So I have to do the same thing he did. He said he did Japanese literally all day. So I was like, well, that's super crucial. I guess I have to do Japanese all day. Whereas, now I have the view of where active immersion is much more important than passive immersion. And so rather than focusing on getting like a little bit extra, passive immersion, it's better to just make sure that you have your active immersion and then do passive immersion when you can. That's like kind of the way I think about it now. But back then I didn't know that. I thought that it was almost like voodoo. It was like, be feeding your brain the language at all times, and then this creates this, some chemical reaction where you get extremely fluent super quickly. So that's why I was super strict about it. And when I went to Japan, then I was pretty much literally all Japanese all the time. Like, I would go whole days where I wouldn't speak a single word of English, and I would aim for that. And so, like, even if I had an opportunity to like speak to another gaijin or something, I would be like, no, I don't want to ruin my streak of not speaking any English. And that was pretty cool. I mean, obviously there was some English, like when I had English class at Japanese school, and sometimes I would speak English with the English teachers there, like the American English teachers at my school. And I would talk to my family sometimes, obviously, in English. And then when I got back from Japan, I stayed pretty dang strict. Besides when I was hanging out with my family, I was pretty much just doing Japanese all the time, although there was a period when I would hang out with an old friend from high school and middle school who didn't speak Japanese and didn't care about Japanese. And we would probably hang out like once a week or once every other week for a few hours, and I wouldn't do Japanese then. I felt very guilty about it. And there was also a period of time where I really liked to watch American or like English YouTubers talk about anime, like anime reviewers and stuff. And I would watch the anime in Japanese with no subtitles, and then I would like listen to them talk about it. And I really just liked the videos. It wasn't that I liked them because they were in English. There just wasn't really anything like that in Japanese. And I remember it was very enlightening to me to hear them talk about their opinions about the shows, because I was a very not critical viewer at the time. I kind of would just passively watch and like I never thought that critically about the underpinnings of the show or like the intent of the author or anything. And so it was like very educational for me to watch those videos, and I just really liked it. And it also gave me this weird satisfaction of like, oh yeah, these American people or whatever, like they weren't all American, but like these English YouTubers, they have to watch anime with subtitles, but I don't watch it with subtitles. I watch it raw and I understand it all. So that's so cool. And I remember like reminding myself that there's people who love anime but have to like watch it through this disconnected form of subtitles would like make me feel like I was doing something cool. And so that, maybe half hour a day on some days I would watch those YouTubers. And that was obviously not in Japanese. Although it was related to Japanese in a way, because it was about anime. And then I would go and watch anime. And I had a bunch of other random phases. Like at one point, I collected Game Boys randomly. And then I really liked chip music. And I wanted to make chip music, like chiptune music. And so I collected Game Boys. I was, just for like a short amount of time a day I would spend on that stuff for probably a few months. And later when I got into meditation, I researched that in English a little bit. So there were times here and there where I had a hobby that involved English and I would take time off Japanese, but I would always feel guilty about it. And I would always end up feeling like, nah, this isn't a good use of time as working on Japanese. I want to improve as fast as possible. And so it was always a half hour a day max, besides spending time with my family. I would never really try to avoid that. I would always just spend as much time with my family as I did before I started learning Japanese. And that was really for the first 5 years. So I was pretty dang strict. It was very minimal time spent on English, and I was very deliberate about that. And after it had been 5 years and I made my 3-hour video, that was I went through a period where I felt like I didn't like Japan. I was done with Japanese. I was fed up with it. I didn't want to see it anymore. And I went through a period where I did almost nothing in Japanese at all. There were many days where I literally didn't hear a word of Japanese. I wasn't doing my reps or anything at that time. And when I did, I'd watch a movie here or there. I'd try to read a manga here or there, but I would spend very little time in Japanese for about a year. And then in this past year, I would say I'm somewhere in between that and where I was before, where I do something in Japanese almost every day. There's some days where I don't get to, but most days I have at least half hour to an hour of something I'm doing related to Japanese. A lot of days I have a few hours that I spend. It's rare that I get more than a few hours. And so I definitely feel that there's a huge difference between, spending a few hours a day and spending the majority of your day. It's a day and night difference. I can still improve now, especially because I'm already so good. But I also feel that if I really wanted to take my ability to the next level and really catch my Japanese up to my English, I'd have to go to Japan and just spend 24 hours a day in Japanese, because that's really what it takes to get to that level of comfort where it feels like your native language. Because I feel like that's the biggest difference between my Japanese level and my English level, is that I'm just so much more comfortable speaking English. It just feels more effortless and automatic. Whereas with Japanese, it feels like it takes work to do stuff in Japanese a little bit, especially speaking. But I can still do everything I want to do, and I can mostly do everything that I do in English in Japanese. It just isn't as easy. And I think when it comes to comfort, it's if you're using English for 2/3 of the day and Japanese for 1/3 of the day, your Japanese is never going to get caught up with your English when it comes to comfort level, right? I think I have to go and spend a few months doing just Japanese, and then I could reach the point where maybe they'd be very similar. And I think I want to do that at one point in the future. But at this point, I've kind of stopped trying to really get there. In America, having a life that involves doing a lot of stuff in English, just because it's not that it's impossible necessarily, but it's very inefficient, right? Because it would be relatively easy for me to really take my Japanese to the next level if I was living in Japan and didn't have any English obligations, whereas trying to do that in the environment I'm in now would require a lot of work and dedication and frustration. So I figured, why not bother? I just keep slowly improving in ways that I can easily improve in being here, in terms of vocabulary and pitch accent. I'll still study that and I improve at that. But in terms of that comfort level where I can really just speak without thinking about anything and it feels just like English, I think I'm going to have to go to Japan to get to that point. And so I've kind of just stopped trying to make that happen without being in Japan. It's would require too much forced effort. So there you go. John Brendel asks, "Hello, Matt. I was wondering whether the input hypothesis is common knowledge among most linguists, or if it's still pretty unknown. If it is common knowledge, then why don't a few of them finally speak up and expose the school system, where languages are still taught in inefficient ways? And if it isn't common knowledge, I wonder how that can be the case, since in the MIA community, we all know that it's the only real way to acquire languages, and I would assume that experts in the field would know this as well. hope you can share your thoughts on this. Well, I don't know too much about linguistics, so I can't really speak about this with too much confidence, but I'll tell you what I do know. Some things that I do know, first of all, is that there's a big gap between people who learn languages and then people who study applied linguistics. And I've heard multiple polyglots kind of make snide remarks about applied linguists, because basically they're all theory and no practice. Like, apparently a lot of applied linguists, like, who study language acquisition, haven't actually learned a language, or at least have never, like, reached fluency in a language. And so it's, like, completely theoretical to them. They have, like, no reference point in their own experience. And so to someone who's actually learned a language, like, you know, me and the other polyglots, we can see how ridiculous that is to think that you could, like, come to an understanding of how language acquisition works when you've never even done it. But if you don't have that experience, it's hard to have that perspective. It's hard to realize what you're missing out on. So there's that. And then there is also, I'm pretty sure that the input hypothesis is pretty well known among anyone who's in the linguistics world, about people who study language acquisition, because it's like in the textbook, right? Like at the time in the 80s, it was a very big thing. And so when you're studying linguistics, you know, there's a chapter in the book about Stephen Krashen's ideas, but I think they just introduce it as like, oh yeah, this guy, he had some crazy ideas. Like some of them were good and influenced later stuff. It's kind of like Freud, right? It's like everyone knows about the psychologist Sigmund Freud, and everyone admits that his ideas were very innovative and new at the time, and very influential, and kind of totally changed the direction that psychology went in after that. But at the same time, no one takes his ideas seriously anymore at all, right? So they still give him a lot of credit, but they also don't actually take his ideas seriously anymore. I feel like it is kind of a similar thing in terms of that. And so the thing is that if you go into the field of applied linguistics, you don't really spend that much time studying Krashen, because your senpais tell you that, oh yeah, we already, you know, you don't worry about that anymore. Like, yeah, he had some good ideas, but if you read the newer stuff, it already encompasses his good ideas, so you don't really have to go into depth about that. And so I think that's kind of the deal. It's like they know about it, but they haven't really contemplated it seriously, and they don't really take it that seriously. And it would be interesting to, I mean, I would want to know more details as well about, like, what do they, like, think? Like, I remember I had, I mean, there is some of Stephen Krashen's hypotheses, like, that have been disproved. Like, one of the 5 hypotheses of the IMP hypothesis is that when you acquire a foreign language, even later in life, you acquire everything in a certain order, regardless of what your native language is. There's like a natural order that, like, whether you're an adult or a baby, if you just get input and you don't do any formal study, you'll acquire the language in a certain order. Like, first you'll learn this component of the language, then this and this and this. And that's actually been disproved with studies, which isn't surprising to me, because if you learn a language later in life, you're going to be highly influenced by your native language. That's my experience, and seems to be pretty obvious. And so, you know, there's other problems you can find with the input hypothesis, right? Like, if Stephen Krashen's ideas were, completely spot on, then there would be much more people reaching native levels in a foreign language, right? Like, Stephen Krashen doesn't address phonology at all. He doesn't explain why people have a foreign accent. Well, like, I heard in an interview Stephen Krashen say, oh, the reason why people have a foreign accent is because of inhibitions they have. Like, it's because they're embarrassed to try to mimic native speakers. If you actually let go of all your inhibitions, then it's there. Like, it just comes effortlessly. You can sound like a native. But this clearly is ridiculous and not the case, right? Because there's plenty of people who, like, put tons of effort into trying to sound native and trying to imitate native speakers, and they still have a foreign accent. Me being one of them. So and so it's just clear that adults aren't equivalent to children when it comes to language acquisition. And so I think the thing is that Stephen Krashen's ideas kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater. Whereas from my point of view, it's like, oh yeah, Stephen Krashen got a lot right, but he got a lot of stuff wrong too. And so, you know, it's somewhere in between. Like, if you have the traditional way of viewing language learning of like, oh, there's no difference between language and acquisition. You just got to learn a language like the same way you learn math. Just like understand it intellectually and then do lots of practice. And then Stephen Krashen, that says like, oh, it's 100% unconscious. Just go and watch Dora the Explorer and then you'll end up, at native level eventually. Like, those are both wrong. The truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think that because for many different factors, I think they ended up going back to the other type of extreme. And I don't really know what people think, like what actual linguists think. When you talk to like most applied linguists, like I'd be interested in talking to like someone who actually studies language acquisition, because I know that a lot of times there's a big gap between what's taught in school and what professionals in the field actually think. And I think this comes down to the other part of your question about how come they haven't spoken out and called out the classes, is because there's always a big gap between what like the leading scientists actually think and what like is the common knowledge. And changing educational systems is extremely difficult, right? It's like, what do you do? Like, so, okay, you're a linguist. What are you going to do? Like, make a YouTube video saying, hey, I'm a linguist, and YouTube and the educational system in school is bullshit, right? Or it's like, just because you are a linguist, it's like, how are you going to change the school system? Who even decides the school system? It's like they're so huge and like rigid. I don't know how you could go about changing it, right? Like, and the other thing is that like schools aren't really about helping people like learn. They're more about making money, right? They're businesses. And so if you really try to apply I think that's another thing too, is that like always thought it was funny that Stephen Krashen, like, as once he had all his insights about language acquisition, his first instinct was, oh, so now we got to make new language classes that look like this, where they just give you comprehensible input, where it's like, wait, why would you have a class in the first place if everything you're saying is true? If everything you're saying is true, you don't need a class. You literally just need like language tapes that you can go watch at home, right? It's like you don't need tests or a teacher to like a real life teacher or anything. And so I think that part of it is that like if you take these ideas seriously, then school itself isn't necessary anymore. And the schools are never going to accept that, because they're interested in their own self-survival and their own flourishing and their own making money. And so they're not going to adopt a philosophy that says that you don't need them, right? They're going to adopt a philosophy that says that you do need them, regardless of what the reality is. And so basically, I just think there's a lot of, I don't really have that clear of a big picture understanding, because I don't know that much about linguistics or about applied linguistics or about like the scientific study of language acquisition. I also don't really know how school systems work, so I don't really know what it would take to change the school system. I mean, it seems like you could also say, how come the SRS systems isn't incorporated into the school system, right? No matter what subject you're talking about in school, you could benefit from using an SRS, and SRS have been around for over 30 years. Yet, most teachers have never even heard of a spaced repetition system. I think it's just that it takes a really long time for this type of stuff to like reach school, and things like school takes a long time for them to change. They change very slowly, and there's just too many parts, and it's too big to like change, right? It's like if it was just like 10 students and like 5 teachers, and you had a little school in the countryside, it'd probably be pretty easy to change the curriculum. But now the curriculum has to be standard. If it's like a public school that is like make sure your students can get all these exams on all these standardized tests, and even in college, then they're like competing with other colleges and all this stuff. And so there's so many factors where it doesn't surprise me that the reality of what would be most efficient to learn in school doesn't match, like the reality of learning doesn't match up with school at all. Like, I think that's nothing new, and that's really obvious. What linguists actually think, I think that I would want to learn more about that, because I don't know that much about it. And that's something I plan on doing. That's like really high up on my priority list, is to study like the scientific study of language acquisition and see like what insights they have and where they're at and things like that. But if they are pretty far off, I'd say it has to do with them basically lacking a real experience and probably getting lost in their head, and just that a lot of this stuff is just too difficult to study, right? Like, I hear a lot of people like citing studies. They're like, man, what do you think of this scientific study? It like goes against what you say. and I look at it, and it's like studied. It's like a study that covers the course of like 2 weeks or like a few months at max. And it's like, hey, these guys did this for like 2 months and then they improved at their language ability, or they didn't improve in their language ability. It's like, well, 2 months is way too short. You know, acquiring a language takes like 1 year minimum, more likely 2 or 3 years. And so it's like, no one has a budget to like do comprehensive studies where they make someone learn a whole language. It takes too much time, right? It's like, how are you going to say, like, you couldn't have a scientific study that was similar to AGET when you're like, hey, come live at this facility and we're going to monitor you and make sure that you get at least 5 hours of input a day. It's like, that's not realistic, because you would have to pay someone so much money to want to sign up for that. And that type of money just like isn't floating around. And there's no one there who's like has that idea to try to do that type of study. And so basically, I don't have a big picture understanding. I just have all these disconnected thoughts that come up. And I would be interested in learning more about second language acquisition, the study of it, and I plan on doing that in the future, and I'll definitely be sharing any insights that I have from studying that type of stuff with you guys. So Josh asks, hey Matt, do you have any plans on making an updated Jiko Shokai video or a new Japanese in the Wild video? I understand that you've made a lot of progress since then, especially with pitch accent, so I think people would be interested in seeing your improvement. Yeah, I do think I'm probably going to make a new video of me speaking Japanese pretty soon. I would want to make another video of me going and talking up to random Japanese people, but at the same time, I think that's kind of weird to do that, because I'm kind of like recording without their permission, and if I ask their permission, they're probably going to say no. And so it's kind of weird. Like, I thought about maybe trying to make a video with one of my Japanese friends where we're just talking, like kind of like Kat's made a video of him talking to his Japanese friend. But either way, I'll probably will make a video of me just talking to the camera or whatever. I think the reason why I haven't already done it is because, first of all, like, I know that there's a lot of people who are going to scrutinize every single thing that I do, and they're going to be like looking for mistakes and like looking for little tiny things, and they're going to be like, oh, look, you messed this thing up. And especially with pitch accent, now that I've kind of like opened up Pandora's box when it comes to pitch accent in the community, there's going to be people like trying to find pitch accent mistakes in my speech who don't, and like there's going to be people who don't know that much about pitch accent trying to find pitch accent mistakes, and they're going to find mistakes that aren't there, and then I'm going to have to deal with that, and that's going to be annoying. And basically, yeah, it's like I've like set such high standards for myself, and that is kind of, you know, my own fault. But I know that people are there's a lot of people who want me to be bad and want to fault me, and so they're going to be scrutinizing it. And so there's so much pressure where whenever I do try to film a video, even if it's decent, it's gonna I think like, oh yeah, but I still made a mistake there, and people are going to think that I didn't know I made that mistake, and they're going to think that I suck, and all this stuff. And so there's like a lot of pressure. And the other thing is that like I said at the beginning of this video, like I don't spend that much time on improving my Japanese anymore. And so I've definitely improved, especially pitch accent. Like I'm definitely better than I was in my Jiko Shokai video, no doubt. But it's been 2 years since my Jiko Shokai video, and I also feel like people are going to be like, this is all you made? This is all the progress you made in 2 years? Like some people go from nothing to fluent in 2 years, and yet you only seem like, you know, marginally better. And I guess I have that thought too. Whereas before I was like, hey, check out how good I am 4 or 5 years. That was a great achievement. But now it's been 7 years or more since I first started learning Japanese. So now it's like, no matter how good I am, it's almost not impressive anymore. Because it's like, well, yeah, dude, 7 fucking years. Like, you know, anyone could get that good after 7 years. I kind of have that thought too. So that also adds to the standards that I apply to myself, and then feel like I'm not satisfied with my ability. And so that's why I kind of hesitate too. But I also realize that, like, I mean, intellectually, I understand that, like, 99% of the people who watch the video won't be able to tell how good I am anyway. And the people who, like, can tell how good I am, like, most of them, like, if you can actually tell how good I am, then you're either a Japanese person, in which case I'll probably be, like, one of the best gaijin you've ever heard, and you'll be super impressed. Or you're another gaijin who got as good as me, in which case you'll probably, like, respect me because you know how hard it is to, you know, actually get to a near native level, and how, you know, even though you'll be able to see it, like the limit of my ability, you'll like understand that I mean, it is what it is, right? It's like, it's almost no one else is at that level, and getting to a higher level is just like so incredibly difficult, especially in the environment that I'm in. So, yeah, I think I will. I think I just gotta like not give a fuck and just make a video. Like I want to start making a lot more videos in Japanese. Like I want to make another channel and just like regularly speak Japanese and just get over the fact that yeah, I'm not perfect. I'm gonna make mistakes. Like I'm gonna not sound like a native. But like I think I just need to get over that and then it will be good. But anyway, yeah, you can expect Japanese videos from me in the future. So Alex Rogers asked, "Hey Matt, could you talk about writing in cursive? By that I mean the style of writing where strokes get connected, corners get smoothed out, etc. I could never find any proper resources explaining how to do it except for some stuff on Wikipedia. I'm primarily looking for a way to learn to write things by hand the way Japanese people write them, since they obviously don't write characters out that rigidly, stroke by stroke, in daily life. That Wikipedia article might not actually..." He links a Wikipedia article. That Wikipedia article might not be 100% relevant to this, since they talk more about a style of writing with brushes that goes way back. I'm not sure how or whether it applies to normal modern day practice. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Okay, so basically, there's many different fonts in Japanese, but there's a few main categories. So there's one type of font called mincho, which is the font that you see in printed books, right? Like, if you have a novel or something, that will be written in mincho. And that's clearly nothing like how people write in real life, right? It's kind of like Times New Roman. You have all these extra little lines here and there that clearly you don't write in real life. There's also Gothic fonts, which are another form of written font where the horizontal lines and vertical lines are the same fatness, but that also as well doesn't represent how people write in real life. Like in those type of fonts, Gothic fonts and Mincho fonts, there will still like things that there'll be things written as two strokes that in real life are written as one stroke, right? Like if you have the radical for string, right? Like itohen, the one for ito, right? That it's like boop 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 boop. Like if you have that one, you'll see like if you look at the written form, the first like couple strokes are all set. It's like let me just write it. It'll be easier. Oh, crap. Where's my pen? Like okay, so they write it like this almost, right? I don't know if it's exactly like this, but it's something like this. So, right, and so you can see right here, this is one stroke. Then there's another stroke, or this is one stroke. Here's another stroke. This is another stroke. Whereas when you write it by hand, like Japanese people write it like this, where it's just like this is one stroke and this is another stroke. Whereas in the written form, they were separate. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can see that definitely like printed fonts are different than, or handwritten fonts are different than the printed fonts. They're easier to write. They have less strokes. More stuff are connected. And so if you download a教科書font, then which you can have on your computer and put on your cards, that is going to represent how Japanese people write in real life. And so it's partially simplified. But it's still, it still has a lot of strokes in it, right? Like if you can, it's not simplified to the point where you wouldn't be able to read it without practice, right? Like when you think about English cursive, it's significantly different. Like if you think about the printed R versus the cursive R, it's like totally different, right? You have to learn cursive formally to be able to read cursive. And so the way that Japanese people write kanji, it's not like that. If you know the printed kanji, you can read the handwritten kanji, because like even though that there's the difference between this and this, you can still tell, right? It's like they're extremely similar. And so there's no so that's the deal. Now the thing that you linked, I didn't actually look at the link, but what I'm assuming you're talking about is something called like Soul Shotai, I think. It's written with like the one for grass, Soul Shotai. And that is a traditional Japanese cursive that actually is cursive, like English is cursive, where it's radically simplified. There's way less strokes. There's way less lifting up the pen or the brush, way more interconnectivity. So it's way easier to write, takes way less movement of your hand, but it's so simplified that you have to study it specifically. And if you don't study it, you won't be able to read it or write it at all. Because it's like everything is simplified in a specific way. It's not just randomly like you're just writing the normal stuff but really quickly. It's like systematically simplified in a certain way you have to memorize. And back in the day, like in the Edo period, they would learn this, right? Like people would study it and learn how to do it. But today they don't teach Japanese people that in school, and Japanese people can't do it. They can't write it and they can't read it. It's like if you ever see one of those crazy calligraphy like paintings, like Japanese people can't read that stuff. Like most Japanese people can't, unless they like have a particular interest in that and they go out of their way to study it. But it's not a normal thing. Like most Japanese people can't read or write in social tai, and that's the real cursive. What Japanese people do is they write in this like just slightly simplified way. That's more like how you write English by hand, right? It's like sometimes like even though English, it's like the difference between this. It's like the A in text is printed like this, but people write it like this, right? But this is still not cursive. It's kind of like that. So this is how it's printed. This is how Japanese people write. And then what happens basically is that Japanese people like just depending on how good their handwriting is, they'll just write really quickly, and then things will just naturally get mushed together. Just like how you can write English quickly without it being cursive, and some things you'll mush together. Sometimes you'll write two letters without lifting up your pen from the paper, right? But it's not systematic. It's just the result of trying to write kanji really hastily and quickly. And so everyone does it a little bit differently. There's no like systematic cursive that the Japanese people actually use. Like Japanese people, when they write, it's basically just like the normal kyōka show tai, except this one. So it's the normal this one, except they write it quickly, and so it gets kind of mushed up together, right? Like if you look at the character for na, like the printed version, like I don't know how to do it, but like okay, so like here's the normal na, right? It would take four strokes, right? But a lot of times Japanese people will write it with like just one or two strokes because they'll just not lift up their pen. And same thing with like the hiragana for so. They'll just like basically it's just the result of being lazy, right? Just try to write it the way that it actually is in the textbook, but then just be lazy. And then if you practice doing that, like I think the key is practice writing Japanese, but force yourself to try to write quickly. And then you will naturally have a native-like type of handwriting, right? And so there's no real cursive to learn. Like, it seems like you're talking about what do Japanese people actually do. What they do is they just write really quickly and then come up with their own kind of simplified way. And so what I would do is, look at actual handwriting of natives and see what they do. And then just kind of have that in the back of your head and just try to write Japanese quickly. And what you'll find is that when you try to write it quickly, it naturally ends up looking kind of like how the natives do, because that's what happened is like that's just what happens. It ends up being more sideways looking. Certain things end up being bigger. Certain things end up being smaller. Certain things end up getting connected together, and that's it. Like Japanese people really aren't strict about it. I mean, a lot of Japanese people, they don't even know stroke order, right? They suck at stroke order. They'll totally mess it up. And so there really is nothing there to learn or practice besides you just make it up on your own. Just like how everyone has their own form, everyone's handwriting in English is different, right? Like as you try to write faster, you like unconsciously make up your own shortcuts and simplifications and things, and that's what Japanese people do too. So basically that's the deal. There is such thing as Japanese cursive. It's called social tai, but Japanese people don't know it anymore. You can learn it if you want to. There's even like a test you can take to like there's like a shikaku you can get. Like you can pass a test in Japan that shows that you know how to read and write that, but it's not going to help you in real life. In real life, just like learn kyōka show tai and then practice writing it quickly and let it simplify itself naturally, basically. And sometimes reference natives. That's what I would say. So Jackson Hardy asks, since you have attained an exceptional level of Japanese ability, what are you most grateful for? What new media or ideas have you been exposed to that is exclusively Japanese that you believe to be very important to you? Or perhaps is it simply the process of learning that you are most grateful for? So this is hard to answer. There's no like one piece of media or anything that I'm particularly grateful for. I think it's just the perspective as a whole. that I'm grateful for. Like, there's a lot of times where I'll be consuming something in Japanese and I'll just kind of have a moment where I realize, like, Japanese is so different from English. And so when you're hearing people express themselves in Japanese, it's like a totally different view of the world. Like, when you're hearing an idea expressed in Japanese, it's like completely different than hearing it expressed in English. And so it's like I have this totally different lens to view the world through than I had before. Like, now I have two completely unique ways of viewing the world. And I'm like really grateful for that a lot of the time. Like, it's not that there's anything inherently special about the view of Japanese, but just the fact that it's completely different yet still valid is what I'm most thankful for. That I have this reference point of like, wow, it's this different. I have these two different ways of viewing things that are totally different from each other. And there's a lot of times where I'm speaking English and a Japanese word pops into my head and I realize, like, oh wow, we don't have a word in English for that. And I realized, like, wow, what a cool word. Like, that Japanese word, like, what a cool idea. Like, I had the mentalese in my head and I'm like, wow, what a cool little chunk of meaning. Like, if I didn't know Japanese, I wouldn't have this thought that I have. And I'm always grateful for that, where I realize, like, my view of reality, like, has been expanded because of that. And I mean, on the surface, it has the negative side effect of, like, whenever I talk to someone who doesn't know Japanese, I'm sure I come across as, like, that guy who is always talking about Japanese. But it's not that I want to be that way. It's just that, like, hey, there's this perfect word in Japanese that I want to express that I want to say right now, but there's no way for me to say it. Like, remember the other day I was, like, eating dinner with my family, and my, like, stepdad is, like, a picky eater, and my mom was always, like, trying to make him eat more different types of food, and my mom was like, do you want to try this thing? My stepdad was, like, immediately like, no, I'm good. And in my mind, I was like, sokuto, because that's what you say in Japanese when you ask someone a question and they answer immediately, which kind of shows that they didn't even really consider it. Sokuto just means, like, to respond immediately. And I wanted to say that, and I was like, and then I was like, oh wait, that's Japanese. What do we say in English? There is no English. And I just had a moment where I was like, damn, there's no way we don't have that idea in Japanese. Like, in Japanese, it's very funny. If, like, someone asks someone a question and then, like, do you want this, or is it okay if I do this, or whatever, and they just, like, have a negative response immediately without even considering it, and then someone else says sokuto, it's like, it's funny because it's like, dude, you didn't even think about it. Like, immediate response. But there's no way to say it in English, and I was, like, kind of grateful that I even knew that sokuto was a thing in itself. And so, yeah, and I mean, there's other times, like, actually just yesterday I was watching the like, Ichiro's retirement press conference, like, in Japanese, and it was really great. Like, you can just tell, like, there was this comment in the comment section that said, like, 何かを極めた人の言葉はもはや哲学, which would mean something like, the words of someone who has truly mastered something is philosophy, basically. Is like it's not just words, it's philosophy. And I was like, that is, like, that's kind of true. And Ichiro, it's like, he had, like, the other word that comes to mind in Japanese is ririshi. We don't really have a word for that in English, but you can just tell he's, like, so clear-minded and firm, and I don't really know how to explain it. If you watch the video, you can just really tell that he's just a man of great stature. And hearing his responses to things, like, he was also actually just a really great speaker. And I really liked the way he would phrase things in Japanese, which I was surprised, because I thought, like, oh, if he's just playing baseball in America for all these years, maybe he would suck at Japanese, because he would never really use it that much. But to my surprise, he was a really great speaker. I just loved the way he would phrase things and the his intonation patterns and stuff. It was, like, really pleasant to listen to, and he would say really great things. And there were so many, like, great quotes. And I remember, like, I bet Ichiro has a ton of American baseball fans. But if you were watching that thing with subtitles, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get, like who Ichiro really was. You wouldn't have that direct sense of how great a speaker he was, and how like how this sense that you can tell that he's seeing something that all these other people in the press conference aren't seeing, you know? And I was really grateful for that, of like, wow, this is a cool event. Ichiro retired, and I'm so glad I get to hear this and understand it in the original language. And there's a lot of times I'll be reading a book and there'll just be like a really beautiful Japanese sentence or whatever. And I'm like super glad that I get to understand that. Or a lot of times after I have a conversation with a Japanese person where it's like, wow, I never could have had that conversation if I didn't. But they're kind of like just abstract moments like that. But overall, it comes down to having the unique perspective and having the unique experiences of, you know, experiencing mentalese that I would never have been able to experience before. You know, like hearing that quote that Ichiro said and knowing like, wow, I never would have been able to like experience that thought or that idea in quite that way if I didn't know Japanese, because there's no way to express it in just that way in English. And I'm really grateful for that. I have a lot of moments like that where I think that's super cool. Hopefully that made sense. It's kind of abstract, and it's something that I think you only really be able to like get in once you've had a similar experience that you can relate it to. Thomas Donovan asks, what are your thoughts on trying to reach fluency, learning only 10 new words per day in Anki, and having only about an hour of immersion each day? While much slower, is it doable? I'm finding that MIA/AJAT approach, or the MIA/AJAT approach, isn't really bringing me any joy when it comes to the Japanese learning process. And up until this point, I've had the idea that learning Japanese was basically an all or nothing type thing. I still want to gain fluency, but having my life revolved around Japanese no longer makes me happy, and I'd like to find a balance that allows me to still reach fluency in a reasonable amount of time without having to sacrifice everything else that I care about to get there. 1 hour of immersion with 10 new cards? I mean, that's tough, man. I mean, basically, the worse you are, the easier it is to improve, right? Because at the beginning, when you don't know anything, you know, you can learn the most common 50 words, and now your comprehension will go from like literally 0 to like 10%. That's a huge gain, right? And the more you learn, the harder it is to really get better in a way. I mean, it depends on your perspective. In a way, it's easier to get better because the more you learn, the easier it is to learn more. But in terms of like the percentage of the language that you're understanding, right? It's a lot easier to go from 0% to 50% than to go from 50 to 100. In fact, going from 0 to 50 is probably equally as difficult as going from 50 to 60. And going from 50 to 60 is probably the same as going from like 60 to 65. And so it gets harder and harder as you approach 100. And so I think if you're starting off with a new language, you could make progress for a while with just 10 cards and an hour of immersion a day. Like you would get better and better. But I think you would plateau after a certain point and not realistically be able to get past that plateau. Like, I don't know where it would be. Maybe you could get to like 50% comprehension, but you definitely aren't going to get to fluency that way. Like, especially when you consider that a component of fluency, right, is that you're able to express yourself relatively easily in this language, which means your entire brain has switched its mode of thought, right? Because if you want to speak Japanese, your brain has to be, you know, working with completely different concepts. It has to be breaking down the word into different concepts and manipulating those concepts in a totally different way, right? If you want to be fluent, you can't just have English thoughts and translate them into Japanese. You have to have Japanese thoughts the first time, which means you're basically kind of like completely reformatting the operating system of your brain, right? I mean, you're adding a new operating system, an entirely new way of functioning for your brain. And you're never going to get to that point with it. It's 1 hour a day, right? Like if you're doing the thing you've been doing your entire life, which is English, for like 95% of the time, and then you have like 1 hour a day when you're doing Japanese, it's like you're never going to build up enough total mass to truly get fluent, right? And the other thing is that like, even if you got fluent, then it's like, if you're only going to spend 1 hour a day in Japanese, what's the point of being fluent, right? Like Katsumoto said, a language is a home, not a hotel, right? Once you're fluent, if you want to maintain your fluency, like I feel like I would have to spend more than an hour on Japanese each day just to maintain my current level of ability. So I don't see how you could get there with just 1 hour a day either, right? And it's like, so once you get there, it's like, why do you want to know Japanese so bad if you would only want to spend 1 hour a day with Japanese anyway? It seems really weird. Like, what it means to be fluent in a language is that it's a huge part of your life, you know? It's like adopting a child. And so if you don't want to, like, you don't want to do that enough, you're not interested enough to spend like a few hours at the minimum each day, then I think that you probably shouldn't really do it in the first place. Because in a way, a language is kind of an all or nothing thing. If you, I mean, if you want to get to the point where you're really having the type of experiences that I was talking about in the previous question, where you have deep, meaningful conversations with Japanese people, you effortlessly understand like high level content, and have like really meaningful experiences through the Japanese language, then I mean that is where the most gain comes from doing this whole thing, right? It doesn't really, in my opinion, it doesn't really come from being able to ask for directions or being able to have a broken conversation with a patient native speaker. Like for me, that's not really what the most profound experiences are when it comes to learning a language. And so if you want to have those most profound experiences, then that takes a huge amount of commitment. And that's the reality. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't not make any commitment and then reach this amazing level of ability that allows you to have really profound experiences. So I'm kind of, I mean, 1 hour a day with immersion, I think is way too little. Like, I think 3 hours is a real minimum if you really want to get somewhere. And that's with the, condition that that's what you're going to be doing for a while until you reach a high intermediate level. And then you're still going to have to take some time off from the rest of your life, maybe go to Japan and really just spend a few months only doing Japanese, because that's really probably what it's going to take to truly get to a level of fluency where you can effortlessly express yourself in this language, or at least express yourself with ease. And the other thing is that when you say that learning Japanese isn't bringing you joy, I mean, you're saying there's so many ways you can change how you engage with the process. There's so many things you can change and customize. There's so many, things you can change your mindset in so many ways, that and just the way that you think about your immersion and the way you approach it can totally change your experience of it. So what I would be inclined to say is that instead of just assuming that whatever you're doing now is like what you're doing now is bringing you joy. So instead of just assuming that, no matter how you change the process, it was always going to never bring you joy. I mean, if you actually want to do this thing, then I would be more motivated to find a way to make it bring you joy, right? Like, that's what Katsumoto always talked about, is that things aren't fun automatically. Having fun is something that you got to work for in a way, right? It's like everyone is different. So you have to find out what's fun for you. You have to find out how you can make this process enjoyable for you. And so that's your responsibility. And if you really want this, that's probably the wisest choice for you to do, is to get serious about finding a way to make it fun. And so that's kind of what I would say, is I'd say sit down, think very seriously about how badly you want this. And if the answer is that you wanted you kind of wanted it superficially, overall, it's not really you don't want it that badly, especially if you think like, okay, even if I get fluent, I'm only going to spend an hour a day in Japanese anyway, then, I mean, you obviously don't want it. Like, obviously it's not that important to you to like have that Japanese fluency. And so maybe consider doing something else, like, because, we only live once. You only have so many hours a day. You only have so many years where you're going to be healthy. There's so many other cool pursuits you could do and cool things you could do and accomplish. So maybe Japanese isn't really what you want to do. And if it is, then I would say get serious about making it fun. So Anime Godfather asks, on your AJAT journey, what are all the insights you've had in order from when you started to when you finished? So I don't know if you're trolling or not, but first of all, I don't remember every single insight I had. I was having insights like on the regular. I remember that. I would have insights like every few days. I'd be like, oh, I see. Like, I just realized something I was missing before. And I would write them down sometimes. I have lots of notes and stuff. But even if I did remember them all, I gather them all, it's like, that would be like 100-hour or more long video. Like, that's the whole point of my YouTube channel. It's like, I'm sharing with you guys all of my insights. So, I mean, I can't really just do that right now off the cuff, like literally every insight. Like, that's really unrealistic. I mean, you're probably just trolling, so you know that anyway. But anyway, the closest thing to this would be my 3-hour video, right? Because, almost pretty much exactly 2 years ago, I thought that I was going to quit Japanese forever, and I wasn't planning on making a YouTube channel. So I sat down and I turned on the camera and I talked about my experience and my advice for 3 hours straight. And I tried to put all the most important stuff in there. And so, I mean, I've had a lot more insights since that point. And there were, of course, a lot of insights that weren't in that video. But that's probably the closest to what it would look like if I actually answered your question. So check that out if you haven't yet. So Nico asks, "Hi Matt, I'll be moving to Japan next month, long-term trip. After about 20 months since starting learning the language, I would consider myself reaching stage 3 in the balanced approach as a reference for what I'm currently able to understand. Any recommendation for starting output once I'm there? Parentheses, language exchange partners, just life, izakayas, etc. I'll be living there for about 3 to 6 months. Any advice you could share on maximizing my time there in relation to progressing with the language and taking advantage of the whole situation?" Well, I would recommend watching my video called How to Start Outputting, and I would pretty much recommend that you do follow the instructions in that video. And the thing about that video, or the thing about the advice that I gave in that video is that ideally you would start outputting kind of gradually over time. I mean, you said you wouldn't kind of just start outputting one day. You would want to kind of first start training your pronunciation a little bit with shadowing, so that you get your tongue moving, and then you would want to kind of start outputting in short small doses, and then watching that back and finding out what you're missing, and then going back to your immersion and getting that. And you want to kind of repeat that process for a while, until you've actualized a lot of your kind of output potential. And then you can start actually, just having more conversations with Japanese people. And so I would recommend that you go through and do watch that video and try to do those things first. And then when you're actually in Japan, I mean, I would try to enjoy yourself, enjoy your ability. If you've spent a lot of time working really hard on your ability, so try to find out what's fun. I mean, I've never lived in Japan at a stage where I was trying to get good at output or anything. So, I mean, I'm not really in the best position to give you advice on this, but I mean, I would probably what I've always wanted to do is I've always been interested in shogi and ego. And so I always had the idea of when I go to Japan, I'm going to learn how to play shogi. And there are these places in Japan where you can just pay a few bucks to get in. And then it's just a place you go to play shogi. And there's just a bunch of other Japanese people who like to play shogi. And you can just meet random people there and play shogi with them. And it sounds like the perfect way to make friends with Japanese people. And so I always thought that would be a really cool thing to do because, it let you meet Japanese people who are real Japanese people, right? They're not interested in foreigners or anything like that. They're just normal Japanese people. So it'd be a really good way to make friends with those people because you'd have something in common, you'd have something to do together, and it could just be fun. It could be fun learning how to play shogi. It's cool. It's a uniquely Japanese game. So I'm not saying you should play shogi, but maybe it would be cool if you could find something like that, some kind of hobby that you could do in Japan that you could meet Japanese people with, whether it's tea ceremony or a martial art, or there's also mahjong, or there's tons of things. It doesn't have to be a uniquely Japanese thing. It could just be an American, it could be skateboarding, right? It's if you skateboard and then you go to Japanese skate parks, you can make friends with Japanese skaters. And so I would try to say, try to find some, either it can be a hobby you already have, or maybe even pick up a new hobby. And you don't have to be too serious about the hobby because, it's kind of just for fun and a way to meet people. But I would try to have a hobby that you can meet Japanese people through and do together, because without that, then it's basically you're just going to end up attracting Japanese people who are interested in foreigners. And that's not really what you want, because you want Japanese people that are treating you as just another person, right? They're not going to view you as special because you come from another country or want you to teach them English or whatever. And so that would kind of be my recommendation for making Japanese friends and stuff. If you later on, once you get to after you do all the steps that I talk about in my how to start outputting video, then you do want to start getting corrected by a native speaker. But that's something you might want to do with like italki or something. Like, you don't really need to be in Japan for that, and you don't need real life Japanese people from that. I wouldn't try to have your friends correct you, because like, you know, you want to keep your friendships and your like language partner stuff separate, because if you're always like asking questions about Japanese or trying to get them to correct you, that's gonna hurt your friendship. You know, it's gonna make it it's gonna like continually like reinforce the fact that you're not Japanese and that you're not the same as everyone else, and it's just gonna be annoying for them, right? It's like, it's not fun to try to correct people. And so I would just you know, don't always try to kind of keep. I mean, the reality will be that you want to get a lot better at Japanese, but don't always I mean, you can talk about that, but don't try to be too always talking about how like asking questions about Japanese and like asking them to correct your speech and stuff, because is going to kind of take them out of it, right? You want to try to get them to forget that you're not actually one of them. Except then you can have a language partner. Like, you can find a Japanese person learning English or something, or I don't think you're a native English speaker, or whatever language your native language is, and then you can do a language exchange and then have them be very strict about correcting you. But that's something you only need to do like once a week or something. Or you could pay like an italki tutor to like correct you, but that's something you only need in small doses, and it's something that kind of comes at the later stage of learning how to output, before you want to basically just be doing all the stuff I talk about in that video. So basically, I like to summarize, do all the stuff I say on my learning how to output video, and then maybe like, if you want to just like enjoy yourself in Japan and also like practice talking to real Japanese people, then I recommend picking up a hobby you could do with them. Eric Wolf asks, have you ever taken the kanji kante, and if not, would you consider taking it? I've never taken it because you have to be in Japan to take it, and I haven't been in Japan for like 5 years. But I mean, I don't think I would take it without studying for it. Like, I don't think I would just take it to see if I could pass it. What would happen is that I would decide, okay, I'm gonna get like this level, and then I would study for it, and then I would get it. And I might do that just for fun. Like, I think it would be funny if I got EQ, which is the highest level, because like I heard like a single digit number of people pass that test each year in Japan. So it'd be pretty funny if I was a gaijin who did that. And if I took a really long-term strategy, it wouldn't necessarily be that difficult if I was using the SRS. But at the same time, those are still going to be like hundreds of hours of my life that I could be doing something else with, and it's not really going to benefit me in any way. Besides that, it'd just be kind of funny and amusing that I had it, and maybe I could get on Japanese TV. But, so maybe I would consider it, but I don't really have I'm not like set on taking it or anything. I mean, maybe I could go for like one of the lower levels, like Jun-EQ or Nikkyu. That'd probably be pretty easy for me to like study for and pass. So maybe I'll do that when I'm in Japan one day. So Alex asks, hey Matt, how different would learning Mandarin Chinese be compared to Japanese using your MIA method? What would you recommend? You got to be careful, because if you're saying MIA method, that's like saying the mass immersion approach method. And then the method and approach are kind of like the same meaning. But anyway, what would you recommend? What parts would be easier / harder? Any potential issues? So, overall, learning Mandarin Chinese would be very similar to MIA, but it would be would be very similar to learning Japanese, but it'd be way easier. Because Chinese is just inherently way easier than Japanese on so many different fronts. Like, first of all, every kanji, like 99% of kanji have only one reading, and it always has that same reading. There's not onyomi and kunyomi, and there's not multiple different like sometimes Japanese, one kanji Japanese will have like 10 readings, and you have to know which one it is in context. The Chinese readings is just like literally they all have one reading, and the grammar is like way easier. It's really straightforward, simple grammar, and in general, it seems like there's kind of just like less words total that you need to be fluent. Like Japanese, the thing is that modern day Japanese is like half Chinese. And so there's the Japanese way of saying it, and then there's the Chinese way of saying it. And if you really want to be fluent, you have to like know both ways. And so there's like so many words in Japanese kind of needlessly. Whereas in Chinese, it's like all Chinese. And so there's just like one way to say it. And I remember when I watch things with when I watch things with Chinese subtitles, it's always amusing because I realize that like in Japanese, a lot of times the Japanese way of saying it will be more casual. Whereas the Chinese way of saying it will be more like formal sounding. It's kind of like how in English, there's like the colloquial way of saying it. And then there's like the big compound word that like comes from Greek or Latin. And it like has the same meaning, but it sounds more formal. Like, it's kind of like that. So the more formal one is the Chinese compound way of saying it. And I'll realize that like the Chinese compound way of saying it, which to me, I have like, feels like formal and, kind of dense. That's just the normal way of saying it in Chinese because it's all Chinese. They don't have Chinese and Japanese. It's all Chinese. And so kind of seems like there's like less words total and it's just more straightforward. Like there's less synonyms, it kind of feels like. And the other thing is that tones are way easier than pitch accent. At least Mandarin tones are way easier than Japanese pitch accent. And I could go into detail about this, talk about why, but basically it's way more simple. And so from my point of view, Mandarin is just like Chinese. It's like if learning Japanese was like hard mode, Chinese would be easy. And of course, Chinese is still way harder than Spanish and Italian or some other language from the same language family as your native language. It's still way harder than that, but it's like not even comparable with Japanese. Like I honestly feel that if I was learning Mandarin, if I had been learning Mandarin from the beginning instead of Japanese, I would be like way better at Mandarin right now than I am at Japanese, like because it would just take less time and effort to get to the same level, and then I would have gotten even further. And that's why I think there are as many foreigners who are seemingly like completely native level in Chinese, like Dashan, but there's pretty much no one like that in Japanese. I think Japanese is just inherently a really fucked up language that is like super hard. And so basically you would just do the same thing. I think it would just be easier overall. Like I would still do lazy kanji in the beginning, then like do some basic grammar, and then maybe like I know there's a really good pre-made Anki deck for Mandarin called like the Spoon-Fed Chinese deck that you can get on Anki Web, and it has audio for every card. So I might start going through that deck, like audio on the front, text on the back, and then also start mining shows at the same time. And I would like learn about the tones from the beginning. I'd memorize words with tones from the beginning because tones are easy enough where you can do that. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, if you are learning Japanese and you care about pitch accent, then there's no challenge that Chinese has that Japanese doesn't. Because, like, normally people say that the tones are hard because they ignore pitch accent in Japanese, but pitch accent in Japanese is, like, way harder than Chinese tones. So anyway, yeah, I think it would be pretty much just an easier version of it. And so... But in terms of the actual action steps, it'd be pretty much exactly the same, except I would recommend learning tones from the beginning, whereas with Japanese, I recommend like waiting a little bit to learn pitch accent, just because Japanese is so hard and pitch accent is so hard that you have too much to worry about at one time. So Ethan O'Brien asks, would you treat names as a new word and make a sentence card for them, or just immerse and common names will stick? I ask because the kanji usage for names varies, but the common writings of names seem worth SRSing. You can, I would SRS names, but I wouldn't make sentence cards because, like, there's no real point of having it be a sentence because they have no meaning at all, and that's the kind of the point of the sentence is it makes it easier to grasp the meaning of a word because a sentence is a kind of a chunk of meaning, whereas it's hard to grasp the meaning of a word in isolation. But you can make cards where you just have a name on the front and you just have to read it, and that's it. And that way making the cards will be easier, repping them will be easier, because it's really just a matter of can you read this or not. But and so I would SRS names, but what I would really do is SRS celebrities. Like make cards where you have a picture of a celebrity on the front, and then it's your job to like recall their name, and because this has a bunch of benefits. First of all, it's going to help you learn celebrities, which is pretty important because all Japanese people know celebrities and it comes up in normal conversations, like Japanese people do this thing where they're like, oh, what does your boyfriend look like? Oh, well, he looks like, he kind of looks like Yamada Takayuki. Or it's like, oh, he looks like Yamada Takayuki and like this other guy like mixed together. And so if you want to be able to understand Japanese people when they're talking about stuff like that, you have to know all the celebrities and what they look like. And so it's also just common knowledge, right? It's like if every single Japanese person knows something, then you want to know that thing too. Because otherwise there's something that Japanese people could talk about that you wouldn't understand. And so I would learn celebrities. Helps you do that. It also just helps you build the meta skill of remembering the names of people, because that's something you have to practice. Like, remembering the names of Japanese people will be very challenging at first because all the names will kind of sound the same to you. And then it also helps you learn how to read names, because like, if you know this guy's name and then every time you on the back of the card you see the kanji for it, you're going to remember it. I mean, you could also just make cards where you have the name of a Japanese person on the front, and then it's your job to read the name and just remember what his face looks like in your head and then see the picture on the back. You could do something like that too. It doesn't really matter either way. But that's what I would do, is I would just make cards for celebrities, and then you kind of get like 3 birds with 1 stone. And what I would do is, like, so when I say celebrities, that's like pretty broad, right? Like, it could be comedians, actors, television show hosts, authors, producers, anything. But what I would do is, like, kind of do it like how you treat words, in the sense where, like, if you're watching Japanese TV and there's some guy on there and you're like, oh, I've seen that guy a bunch of times, I don't know his name, then find out his name and learn it. Don't just learn random people here and there. Learn people who you've seen before, because first of all, it's going to make it easier to remember them. And second of all, it's a built-in frequency list, right? It's like, if you've seen a guy a bunch of times, you know that he's probably going to come up again, and that he's probably popular and a lot of people know him. So, like, whenever I'm watching a Japanese movie and I recognize an actor who I don't know the name of, I will look them up. And I used to make cards all the time for these people, but I have gotten better at just, like, remembering names naturally, because, like, I, over time, trained up my meta skill of remembering the names of people and, like, reading names. So now I don't really need to make cards anymore, and I can naturally remember the names of people. But I used to make a lot of cards, and I think it helped me get to the point where I am today. So I would make cards. Don't go, like, overboard. Like, you could just make 1 a day. Like, for a while, I would do that. I would have a list of celebrities, like, in my notepad file of, like, all the words I want to learn. I'd have a separate list of, like, the names of celebrities who would come up multiple times. So, like, whenever a celebrity would come up twice, I'd look up their name, and then I'd paste it on this list. And then every day I would just make 1 card for one of the celebrities off the list, and it would just be a picture on the front, and then the first sentence from the Wikipedia entry, where it just says, like, blah 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 person, like 35 years old, is like a comedian, a Japanese comedian from the comedy duo blank blank blank, who was born in like Kyoto, Japan, or whatever. I just have that, and I wouldn't memorize that. I would just casually, passively read it. All I would memorize is his name, and that had a lot of good benefits. I really recommend doing that. So Simone asks, would you consider taking the JLPT test in the future? Even though it will not be useful, I think some people may have to take the test anyway, work university, etc. So it would be interesting to hear from you some advice or something. I don't think I'll ever take it, because I hate taking these type of tests, and it's super mendokusai. Like, you have to sign up way in the future and then go to some place, and it's like hours long. That honestly just sounds like torture to me. And I already know I could pass anyway, and I don't really plan to work for someone ever. So I don't think that... So I'm never going to need it anyway. I mean, who knows? Maybe my plans will change, and then I will need to work for someone, and so I'll need to get the test because it'll help me get hired. But at this point, I don't plan on working for anyone anyway, so I don't think I'm going to need it. And like, when it comes to advice, like, you don't need advice. The only advice I have is get good, because if you actually get good, the test will be easy. Like, actually, just a few hours ago, I took the JCAT. I'm about to upload it after. By the time this will be out, the video of me taking the JCAT will be out. I got a score of above 350, and 350 was the line of being near native level, or the English was near native. The Japanese was like Nihongo Bogo wa Soto, which means equivalent to Japanese native speaker. And I never studied for the test, right? And so basically it said, like, hold on, I still have, let me just look at it right here. It says that from 250 to 300 is JLPT level 1. So, like, I got 350 on this test, which means I'm pretty sure I could, like, super easily pass the JLPT N1 just because I'm good. So you only need advice if you're trying to take the test, even though you're not, like, actually good enough to just breeze through it, right? it's like you can train for the test. You can buy prep books and go through the prep books and like train your meta ability of taking tests. But if you're actually good, you'll be able to just know nothing about the test, walk in and take it and pass it. So that's my real advice, is like, just get good. And then, I mean, if you want JLPT advice, there's lots of people, you don't need it from me, right? Like passing JLPT isn't a, like, I can give you advice about how to get good. That will help. If you want to try to pass the test without being good, then you want to go to someone who specializes in that, right? Like, go to someone who's not good at Japanese and pass the JLPT N1, because they're going to have the best advice about that. I'm not going to be able to give you that advice because I'm never going to have that experience. Like, I've been learning Japanese for 7 years, and so for me, I'm going to take, if I went and took the test, I would just be like, oh yeah, it was super easy. Maybe it's not easy, right? Maybe I just can't understand the like perspective of the average person studying Japanese, because I've just been doing it so long, I'm like desensitized to it. Just like how math teachers have trouble teaching math sometimes because they've like know these concepts so well, they can't even imagine what it's like to not understand the concept. But, and so, yeah, like, I think the best advice you could get for the JLPT, besides just my advice, which is get good, is like, yeah, go find some person who has JLPT N1 and who sucks at Japanese, because they'll probably have some really sweet, like, study, like, tips to, like, learn the format of the exam, or, like, how to get the right answer on the multiple choice section without actually knowing what the answer is, like, there's lots of little, like, basically gimmicks that work for getting a high score that have nothing to do with Japanese ability. And there's, like, I'm not going to be the YouTuber who teaches you that. So, Asflug asks, how many kanji can you read? Hate this question. It's so stupid, because what does it mean to be able to read a kanji? Like, what does that mean? You mean like, if you took I'm assuming that this is what you mean, but I wish you would word it this way, because then it would sound like less stupid. If you could take every single word that you could read, right? How many total different kanji would be included within that package, right? Like, if you took a text file that had every single word that I could read in it, how many unique kanji would be on that list? If that is what you're asking, the answer is probably somewhere over 5,000. I remember that I used to have an Anki add-on that would tell you how many unique kanji were in your Anki collection, and it was over 5,000. But I knew there's also kanji that I could read that weren't in my Anki deck, so probably over 5,000, probably not over 6,000, so probably somewhere between around there. And that's just from me learning words that came up in my immersion. But I did go out of my way to read a lot of obscure stuff and old stuff and stuff. So, last question, Peter Pham asks, how do you keep yourself motivated to continue meditating? Does the practice reinforce itself with more new things or things to improve as you go along? I mean, I would say a deep understanding of the benefits and a deep wanting those benefits is what keeps me motivated. Like, I've gained so much from meditation, but I also have the understanding that I'm in the bottom of the Dunning-Kruger curve, which means all the greatest things I've probably yet to even gain. And so it's like, it's just kind of like common sense. It's like, what motivation do you have to brush your teeth every night? It's like, well, if I don't, I'm going to get cavities, and I don't want cavities. You know, it's like not that hard. I mean, that's kind of a bad example because it's negative. Like, I mean, a similar one is like, how do you keep yourself motivated to study Japanese? It's like, well, I like studying Japanese and I want to get better. So, you know, it's like pretty natural. It's like, I see how much better shape my mind is in than it was before I started meditating. And I see how much room for improvement there is. And, you know, every day I experience so many, like, just moment to moment, I have so many times where I realize, like, oh, wow, like 2 years ago, this annoying thing that happened to me, it would have caused me, like, much more stress. Like, in the same situation, I would have been way more stressed. Or in the same situation, I would have been so much more angry. Or would have been so much more depressed. Whereas now, I'll feel totally fine. And so it's, like, really awesome. And it's like, yeah, I want more of that. Like, especially when you have distance from your thoughts. Like, you have a nasty thought that before would have made me depressed. And before, I'm just like, oh, yep. It's a thought, like, doesn't even faze me. Or when I realize, like, oh, wow, I'm kind of bullshitting myself right now. Like, wait, what am I doing? I'm creating a story to justify something that I want to do emotionally, and then trying to, like convince myself that I'm only doing it because I have all these good reasons to do it. When in reality, first I wanted to do it because of an emotional reason, and then the story was created afterwards. And then I can be honest with myself. So it's like so many benefits, and I see myself like, it's so easy to notice character flaws in other people. It's way harder to notice them in yourself. And I feel the more that I meditate, the more I notice my own character flaws, and the more I can slowly start to improve on them, although it's a long process. And so the idea of like not going through this journey is just like, why would I not do that? It's like the best thing ever. It's like meditation, in my opinion, meditation contributes to your like moment to moment well-being more than any other thing possibly could, right? It's changing your relationship to yourself, and your relationship with yourself is pretty much what's going to define your overall level of happiness and fulfillment in your life. So, like, nothing could be more important and relevant to a human being, because human beings are programmed to want to not suffer and experience happiness. And I'm no exception. And so I know that meditation is going to continue to move me in that direction. So of course I want to keep meditating. Like, I never even had the idea of like not doing that. And lots of times meditation isn't fun and it sucks, especially when you're like, working through some difficult stuff. But in my experience, the results is always worth it. And so I continue to feel that I couldn't have more meditation. I could never have that. How could I not be motivated to meditate? Sorry. So that was this week's Q&A. Thanks for listening, guys, and leave your questions. Thanks for supporting me. Highly appreciate it.